Hello again. We are going to be looking today at Hill's fourth lesson from her book, Bible Translation Basics. And so the fourth lesson is called Processing Effort, Benefits, and Relevance. Processing Effort, Benefits, and Relevance. So read the story on page 29. You can follow along as I read it. And then we'll look at the group discussion questions after the story. The amazing Dr. Munford. Everyone at the conference was looking forward to the visit of a distinguished professor from Oxford, Dr. Mumford. He was an expert in oral communication. Peter and John felt very honored to be at a conference with such important speakers and dressed in their best clothes that day. They were looking forward to understanding how to reach their people better with the gospel, and were sure Dr. Mumford's lecture would help them to do so. After a long introduction that listed all of his accomplishments, Dr. Mumford began his lecture. John and Peter had never heard anyone with an accent like this, and they had to strain to make out what he was saying. Besides, he seemed to swallow his words. So John and Peter had to pay close attention. But that wasn't all that made it difficult. Dr. Mumford used long words they had never heard before, like aggregative and mnemonics. When Dr. Mumford started talking about the Homeric tradition of Milman Parry's discovery, John and Peter were completely lost. They felt like they were drowning in a flood of new information. Before long, Peter noticed John's head nodding. Everyone clapped loudly for Dr. Mumford when he finished his speech, and he was escorted to the dining room where he enjoyed lunch with the conference leaders and then left. In the afternoon session, the conference leader, Mr. Jones, asked, "What did you understand from Dr. Mumford's lecture?" There was silence in the room. Mr. Jones realized that no one understood much, so he gave a summary of Dr. Mumford's lecture in a way the group could understand, leaving out the parts that were not relevant to them. What had seemed so difficult to understand suddenly came within reach. Everyone was happy to understand at least some of what Dr. Mumford had tried to communicate. So now I'd like you to answer the questions from the group discussion and send those to me in the WhatsApp group. So pause the video and look at the questions. Number 1, discuss what made Dr. Mumford's speech so difficult for John and Peter to understand. Number 2, discuss what Mr. Jones did to help the conference participants understand what Dr. Mumford had said. And number 3, a lecture can be easy for some people to understand, but very difficult for others. Discuss why this is so. So we're going to continue on after you finish those questions. So pause the video, and when you're done, come back to the video. All right, so we're going to continue on page 30 and talk a bit about what it means when Hill discusses processing effort, benefits, and relevance. On page 31, Hill writes, quote, "The pain has to be worth the gain, or we may stop listening." The pain has to be worth the gain, or we may stop listening. In other words, the amount of effort we use to understand what is being said must be worth it. The information we gain is the cognitive benefits, which we discussed in the previous lesson. So cognitive benefits, the things that help or benefit your mind. So remember cognitive benefits: 1, strengthening thoughts; 2, eliminating thoughts; and 3, forming new implications or new thoughts. So these benefits must be greater than the processing effort or the effort it takes to understand in order for the communication to be relevant. So a goal of a speaker and a goal of us translators is to keep the processing effort low. The lower the effort and the more precise we can be in our communication, the more benefits the listener or reader will gain. We want the readers to understand and not tire out from reading extra information, too much information, which does not benefit them. If extra information is given, it should add to the benefits of the readers, like adding new thoughts or strengthening thoughts. Hill gives the example on page 31 of saying, class starts exactly at 2 p.m. versus class starts exactly at 2 p.m. and not a minute later. So we assume that the added information is not to be wasted, that it's giving us something important, and that is more, the time that class starts is going to be precisely at 2 p.m., not a minute later. So when you are reading scripture, pay attention to information that seems added or unnecessary. Ask yourself, why did the reader include this information? It is there for a reason. And be sure that your reader gains the information being communicated. So what was the original author intending to communicate? And then what are we trying to communicate as translators for our target audience? That information is there for a reason, and we want the processing effort to be low enough that they get the information that is being communicated. So Hill gives 3 reasons for communication failure on pages 32 and 33. So these 3 reasons are that the expectations are not high enough or they're too high, meaning we either spend too little or too much time trying to understand. While you are translating, don't spend too much time reading between the lines and adding to the text something the author didn't intend to communicate. Expectations are filled is number 2. So the first one is expectations are not high enough or they're too high. The second one is expectations are filled, but not in the intended way. This is a failure of communication. So be careful not to assume that you understand. Your context may mislead you. So be sure to study the original context of the scripture you're translating. So as you're looking at the original text, don't assume the meaning. Study to make sure that you have the meaning and that you're communicating it faithfully. The third thing is extra effort, but no extra benefits. This is also a failure of communication. So take time to communicate clearly and naturally. If the text is too hard to read, the reader will lose interest or feel lost. And so as you're reading the original text, if it's too difficult, then take the extra time that's needed to make it easier for your reader, or else you'll lose your reader. So make sure that the pains that the reader is taking to understand is benefiting them, that the pain is worth the cost. Pain is worth the gain. Pain is worth the gain, that the effort that they're putting out is worth it by the information that they're gaining from that effort. So now translate the following statement and briefly discuss as a group what you understand from the lesson. So the statement you can find on page 34, at the bottom of page 34. Hill says, for scripture to be understood, translators need to make sure that audiences are able to experience enough benefits without unnecessary processing effort. For scripture to be understood, translators need to ensure that audiences are able to experience enough benefits without unnecessary processing effort. So take some time with this statement, translate it into Swahili and Kikurewe, and put that in the comments section. So do that now. So pause the video and do that now. Okay, so for your assignment this week, I'd like you to find the letter from lesson 1 that you wrote to the leader, the church leader, about why the translation is important. And so find your letter and identify words or phrases that a non-Christian, would have a difficult time understanding. So take your letter and mark all the phrases or words that a non-Christian would have a difficult time understanding. So underline the phrases and share with the group this assignment, and then record your findings or record a voice clip of what these phrases are and share why they may not be understood and what would help them to be understood. So how can you lower the processing effort so that the information given is worth it and that it helps the reader gain something, that the non-Christian reader would gain something from your letter? So take time to work on that assignment, and we'll come back again next week for the next lesson.